Hey everyone, how's it going? This is the Ball Metal Nerd coming at you with another video. And obviously, you know what this one's going to be about because you read the title. Really, what inspired me to make this video are some comments I've gotten on some of my videos about this band. I did a video about glam metal, and people said, well, Pantera used to be glam. And then I did another video about bands changing styles. And I didn't talk about Pantera in that video because, truthfully, I thought Pantera is like the very self-explanatory uh, example of a band changing styles and it being a giant success. But since you guys have been talking about Pantera a little bit, I'm going to talk about Pantera a little bit because they're definitely worth investigating a little more in depth than I have so far. So let's go ahead and talk about, we're of course going to start off with Pantera's early years, and which of course means their, glam metal albums, right? In their first three albums, which are, I just bear with me, I've got to read through this because I don't have the names memorized. Their first album was Metal Magic, second album, Projects in the Jungle, and their third album is I Am the Night. Okay? I did a cursory listen to those on YouTube today, and I was completely unimpressed with them. Frankly, it's just, like pretty much what you would expect. 80s glam metal hard rock sounding like Def Leppard, but not done nearly as well as the bands that we all know of for that style. It's just not interesting music in that style that Pantera did for a few albums. It was just, not good in my view. If you like those albums, feel free to comment down below. Let me know why. I just don't think those albums are worth listening to at all. In fact, if Pantera had not done what they did, we would not be having this conversation here in 2020 about it. If Pantera had continued down that path, they would have remained an obscure band forever and have been completely forgotten about by now. So what changed? Obviously, Phil Anselmo joined the band, and they did an album, not Cowboys from Hell yet. They did one called Power Metal. And Power Metal, I gave that a listen to as well today, and I quite enjoyed Power Metal. It's vastly different from Cowboys from Hell, obviously. It's not groove metal, so to speak. It's more just straight up metal, and it's pretty good. I've heard it before, but it had been a really long time since I had listened to it. I'm actually really glad I took the time to listen to it today because it's a really, really good album. It's not as good as their later work, but that being said, huge step up for their first three albums. But obviously, that's not what net them their quote legendary status. I think Phil joining the band was the catalyst for them to, for lack of a better term, go in the right direction, because look how much of an improvement just the first album that he was on them with. Of course, with Pantera's fifth album, and really, I consider this, a lot of Pantera fans would consider this their first album because, let's face it, before this album, nobody knew who they were, right? I mean, prior to Cowboys from Hell, number 10 in my top 50 list, by the way, nobody knew about Pantera. Nobody knew who they were. Nobody had ever heard of them. This album, they decided to change their style significantly, and it paid huge dividends for them, right? This album rocketed Pantera pretty much instantly to like the upper echelon of metal fame, right? I mean, it was a very quick thing. I mean, they went from basically being completely unknown to, after this album came out, metal fans knew who they were after this. I mean, they went 0 to 100 pretty much with one album. And of course, after the release of Cowboys from Hell, Pantera really tried to distance themselves from their prior work. And truthfully, I can see why. I mean, obviously, glam metal was dead by that point, and they wanted to reinvent themselves. And they did, and they were incredibly successful at it. They obviously created a masterpiece of a work. And this, of course, is the pre-internet days. So they were more able to do that than a band would nowadays, right? I mean, yeah, that just would not be possible in today's world. Period. So obviously, just a giant success for them. And of course, they just continued that on basically for the rest of their career. Vulgar Display of Power, another awesome, fantastic album with a lot of classics on it. An absolutely great record, no doubt. And then after that, of course, I mean, I'm just going to go through the Pantera discography from this point on. So, and there will be a conclusion, don't worry. Then, of course, we've got Far Beyond Driven, which is also pretty good. I enjoy this one a fair amount. A lot, this one's a little bit split amongst the fan base, but I like it. And you got to keep in mind, when these albums were coming out, metal was seen as a very, quote, uncool thing. This is before the revival of metal in the late 90s. This is all like early and mid 90s stuff, which was really the worst time for metal, right? When did Great Southern Trendkill come out? Oh, this was mid 90s. Okay. Then, of course, we got Great Southern Trendkill. And this album's okay. It's not as good as their last three, but it's still fairly solid. It's not my favorite Pantera album, but it has its moments. And then we have, of course, their final album here, Reinventing the Steel, which is, again, an okay album, right? It's okay. It's not fantastic. It's not great, but it's not terrible. It's okay. So essentially, what's the sum total of Pantera's career? Well, if we look at it just based on, album, like how good the albums are, we have one good album, pretty good album with power metal. We have three, I would call them great albums, I guess. Cowboys, Vulgar, and Far Beyond Driven. Then we have two okay albums at the end. And then, of course, the stuff previous to power metal is not even worth listening to. So, what does that mean? It would mean that if we put all that together, we'd say, oh, Pantera's, an average band that did some really good stuff, and, but, not, quote, one of the greats, right? Well, I would say if we categorize them that way, I think we're doing them a little bit of a disservice, right? Simply because they were in the right place at the right time. They saw an opportunity and they seized it and they capitalized on it and they did a great job with it. I would say Pantera, after Metallica, Pantera was the closest thing we had to another Metallica in metal. Period, right? They were probably the last band that just really swept through the metal community, and almost every metal fan got into them, right? I'd say they were it. They were the last one for that to happen with. And the reason I think they were the last one is because, well, after Pantera faded, the internet had already exploded in popularity by then. So because of that, it led into our, quote, modern era for music listening, right? It was, with the fractured tastes. If you only want to listen to death, gore, grind, goat metal, you can now because of the internet. And I think that's really what it was. I think it's just after the internet, people retreated into their, microcosms of what they liked, and because of that, I haven't seen like a mass metal band to really that every metal fan's going to get behind like they did Pantera. I just don't see that happening really ever again, sadly. So, and Pantera really helped keep the lights on for metal through the 90s when it seemed like metal was on the ropes. Pantera was still there, punching, bobbing and weaving, and obviously they had a giant impact on modern metal. They totally came along and changed like the way metal sounded, right? And probably the biggest influence they had was just on the production style, the way the recording sound. Because if you listen to Pantera's recordings and you listen to any modern metal recording, you can hear the influence of the production of Pantera's work in modern metal recordings. Whether that's good or bad is completely up to you. But yeah, they had a giant impact on the genre, no doubt. So some people do consider Pantera to be, quote, overrated. Myself, I'm not sure how I fall on that spectrum. Looking at just the impact they've had, do I think they were like the best band that's ever existed? No, I don't. I think, honestly, for like talent wise and how original they are and how good they are and all that, I would say they are a pretty good band. They are, definitely on the above average tier, right? But no, I don't think they're the greatest band that's ever lived or whatever. But that being said, they had this impact that can't be even fully quantified, right? I mean, they just had a giant impact on metal. So anyway, I'm done talking about Pantera. Please let me know what you think in the comments below about all this. I'm going to try to track down a copy of Power Metal on CD. It may never happen, but whatever. I'll at least download the MP3s. But anyway, that's pretty much it. If you like this, thumbs up. If you don't, thank you so much for watching. As always, live long and prosper. Keep on rocking.